Well, hello and welcome to another tutorial. Today I'm going to do an estuary scene with boats. Now I've got a piece of Bockingford 300 grams per square metre cold pressed paper down here. This is a quarter imperial, so it's 15 inches by 11, and I've taped it off down here to make it into a square format. The horizon I've drawn on just a little below centre. So what I'm going to do is put a sky on this. So on the palette here I've mixed a really thick mix of ultramarine and light red, which gives me this deep plum colour, and I've got a blob of cerulean blue on here as well. So I'm going to use the medium hake or medium hacky, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and I'm going to put a nice thin film of water right the way across. And I'm going to make sure that that comes an inch or so below the horizon there. I might just need a little bit more. Conditions are quite cool here for me today, so it's not going to evaporate too quickly, so I might get a little bit more time. So that's a nice even film of water, and what I'm going to try and do is direct the energy of the sky towards a focal point at the bottom. So I'm picking up some of the cerulean. Give the brush a nice shuffle from side to side like this. That distributes the paint across the tip of the brush, as you can see. And then I'm just going to sort of gently flick in some patches of cerulean blue here and there, drag a little down to the bottom, and then just put the tip of the brush into my plum colour and start putting in some clouds like this, which I'm going to sort of zigzag down and try and get them to form this focal point down here. I'm going to start bringing the clouds in from this side. So I've just picked up a small amount of paint to start with, because I don't want this to be too overpowering at this stage. And then just to finish off with a little bit of slightly stronger plum. These are just little turns of the wrist, little flicks, just to create these lovely sort of clouds coming down to this focal point. Just a few gentle brush strokes down here. Just drag that over the horizon, and I think I want a little bit here just to balance it off. So I've done that quite quickly because I want the paint to have time now to settle in the water that's on the paper. I don't want to keep over brushing it, because as it dries the brush marks will then become really hard. So the next stage is for me to put a wash of cerulean blue right the way across this lower area. So I'm using the hake again, got a full brush load of water there, and I'm just going to wet that whole area below the horizon, pick up a little cerulean blue, and basically gently ease the brush across to create a few bands of the blue across there. I just picked up a little bit more paint. So you'll see the significance of that a little later on. That's as much as I want to do there. So I'm going to get the hairdryer on that now and dry that off quickly. So the next phase is to create a river estuary here. So I want it to look like there's a water course and there's some low-lying areas of sand as well. The tide's out, the boats will be sitting in quite shallow water in this river estuary. So I've got a number 10 spearhead brush here. I'm going to get some burnt umber, which is on the palette here, and really loosen this off so that it's really milky like that. I'm just going to test it on the paper at the side here, perhaps just slightly stronger than that. It's really important to do this before you paint, really, to make sure that your paint is ready to go. There we go, that's how I want that. And I'm going to use the hake again just to put some cerulean blue on. So I'm going to try and create a focal point here. Later on you'll see I'm going to put some distant headlands on with a gap between them, which will be about here. So I've got some cerulean, and I'm going to pull the brush across from there to there, and then across to here, And then this time, get a little bit more water in the brush. It's a little bit strong that. Let me just, there we are. I'm going to pull this across here now. And I'm going to try and leave some gaps with some of the paint underneath showing through. And these will look like sort of ripples in the water later on. Yeah, well, that's lovely. So I'm now immediately going to get the number 10 brush and fill that up with the burnt umber. And I'm going to pull some of that across here. I'm going to work quickly because I want to blend this paint into the cerulean blue that's already on. Like that. So these are lovely, long, positive brush strokes. This is a bit of a sandbank here as well. So I'll just pull some of that burnt umber across there. Just extend the brush stroke into the cerulean and it will blend. So I'm keeping the separation between the colours, but softening them and blending them. Maybe there's a few shallower areas down here in the foreground, a little bit of sand showing through. And I'm going to finish this off with a little bit of the plum. So I'm only putting the tip of the brush into the plum. I don't want much. And what it does is it just gives another dimension to those sort of those sandbanks that you see there. Let's have a little bit down here as well. A few lines across. This is all going to be rippling water with reflections in it later on. Just a touch more and then I'm going to call that section finished. I want to just put some headlands on some land masses in the distance. These want to be really pale because they're a long way from the foreground. So this is a little bit of the plum colour from over here, and I've put it to one side on the palette, and I'm adding a lot of water to this to make this really loose because I don't want these to be too dark. Let me just test that, see what that's like. There we go, really pale like that. So I'm going to fill the number 8. I'm going to start the right hand one about here. So I'll have a landmass sort of rising. And then this technique really, you can see there's a lot of water there and I'm dragging it along bit by bit. There should just be enough in the brush to get me to the end. And I'm going to avoid the temptation of going over it and touching it again anywhere, because that will just leave a mark. So doing it that way will leave you a lovely soft trail of paint, which should granulate. And I'm just going to put a little headland on this side as well. So sitting within this natural harbour here, there's another little bit of land coming in, and this just helps to balance the picture out, which you'll see later on. So I've got a number 6 spearhead brush here, and I've got some plum, which is a little bit stronger than the one we used before. And the idea is just to pull the brush along a series of these sort of lines across here, coming in from the right and then diminishing. I'm going to use a rigger to just put what might be some cranes or hoists or something if it's a bit of an industrial background. Something like that. Okay, that's dry now and the paper's flat again. So what I want to do now is mark the position of the boats. I'm going to have a pontoon coming out here. So I'm going to draw a line across. This is, I would say, comes out about just over 1/3 of the way, and it's about 1/3 of the way down here. I don't want this to be too near the bottom, and you'll see what I'm going to do with that in a minute. And then down in this area I'm going to have a sort of rowing boat sort of beached on the sand down here. But before we do that, let me give you some tips on how to draw boats. Right, the first boat I'm going to draw is a front-facing boat which is symmetrical. So I'm doing this quite big so that you can see it on here. So this is my tip for drawing a boat. If you just sketch a box like this onto your watercolour paper, gently with a soft pencil, put a line down the middle. So the bow point for the boat is here. We'll just draw a line down to there. And then curve, come down from here and curve off into the water at the bottom. Try and get that symmetrical, and it wants to be flat at the bottom like that. And then the cabin sits directly on top of that, like that. And then you can put some windows in as you want. So there we've got a central window and some side windows. And we'll do the same on the other side. Like that, and then obviously we can put a mast on top of that at that point. So that's the first one. The second one is, this one isn't symmetrical. So with this one, I'm going to draw exactly the same box. There we go. But I'm going to start here. That's about a quarter of the way down, third of the way down, and a quarter of the way across, about here. I'm going to just draw a line down there. That's the bow, and then the boat sort of comes down there, and then it's a straight line down there. And then you can curve under again, and curve under again there. Flat bottom, and then there's a cabin sat on top of this, like that. And we can put a couple of windows in there as well. So I just think this is a really helpful way to sort of get the shape of the boat right, because if you just try drawing them freehand, they're an absolute nightmare. So that's the second one that I'm going to put in. And then the third one, this is the rowing boat, and my very good friend Graham Cox, who's a pastel artist, he showed me this many years ago and I've never forgotten. So you'll see this as it emerges. We start this drawing with a slightly sloping stick like that, and we turn that into the letter T, which is quite long on the top, just curling down a little at the edges like that. I'll just put a little drop on the end of each of the points at the end of the T. Now I'm going to find a bow point. Now this might look a bit confusing at the moment, but you'll soon see what I'm doing. I'm going to come out from there to about here, and then go up about the same distance and put a dot. And then I'm going to continue that line down, go outside the line of the dot, turn it, and then bring it up to that point. And then go from there, a gently curving line down to there. Then we can complete the stern end of the boat and draw in the side and curl it down underneath there. And then we can put some lines on, those sort of plank lines along the side. And you can see that's a lovely little boat just perched over on its side, stranded on the beach. Some of these, they might have a mast, they might not, but we could put a mast in there as well if we want, which wants to be parallel to that line. So those are the three boats I'm going to put into the painting. So there it is, drawn up, and I haven't put too much detail on the boats because I'm going to remove some paint from this now, and it very often takes some of the pencil lines off. So quite a bit of this may have to be redrawn. So I've got a 1/4 inch flat brush here, and I've got some water in it, and there's parts of these boats now that I want to release and get white again. So I'm just scrubbing, for example, the cabin on the top of this boat, and I'm going to dab that with some kitchen towel. And because I'm using Bockingford paper, and this is the beauty of it, I can remove the paint and it's white again. Bit of magic. So I don't want to do all of the boats, I only need to do the relevant bits. So I'm going to crack on with that, and then obviously when we come back to this you'll see where I've removed all of the paint. Okay, so I've removed paint from the cabin and the side of the hull here, cabin and the side of the hull here, and I've taken some off the top of the pontoon here, inside of the boat and down this side of the boat. And I've also just redrawn, because the rubbing the paint off took some of the pencil off, so I've just redrawn the windows and various things. So I've got a little bit of the plum colour from earlier, put a little bit of water in it, and I'm going to just paint in the contrast areas of the white. So that's the front of this cabin. I'm going right across the windows. I'm leaving a little flash of white right on the top. I'm going to paint that window in while I'm there. This is the number 6 brush actually. She's got a nice sharp point on it. And I'm going to paint the left hand side of this cabin, because this is in shadow. Again, leave a little white flash at the top for the light. Like that. Now inside the boat, I'm going to use some of the burnt umber, really quite pale, and I'm going to paint the whole of the inside of the boat with that. The rowing boat, and down the side like that. And what I'm going to try and do down the side is just get some slightly stronger burnt umber and just blend it in at the bottom to see if there's a hair on there. On the end of my brush, picked up a hair off the palette. There we are. Just blend in a little bit of the darker burnt umber, stronger stuff, at the bottom edge, so that it looks like there's a transition of light around there. I've got to just put these windows in as well on this side of the boat with that plum. So I'll quickly get that dried off with a hairdryer, and we'll move on to the colours of the boats. So that's dry. I'm now going to put some colour on the boat. So I'm using light red. You just got to be careful you don't get this too strong, otherwise it'll be really dark and really rich. I always try and start at the top if I can and just work my way to the bottom, and that way I don't brush over it again to create any drying marks. So that's nice. That's the right hand side done in the light red, and then the other boat I'm going to do in ultramarine. And actually I've put the tiniest amount of light red into the ultramarine, because sometimes ultramarine can just be a bit blue, a bit too blue. Let's start on here, look, at the top again. I'll just work the brush down to the bottom like that. So we've got a nice red boat there and a nice blue boat there. While I'm here, by the way, I'm just going to do the inside of the rowing boat again. So that's the right hand side of the inside. I'll just do it that a little bit, go over it again with some burnt umber, and it just darkens it, and it makes the inside of the boat three-dimensional as well. Again, that's going to need a quick dry with the hairdryer. Okay, they're dry, and I think it's really important not to be afraid of contrast. So I'm using some really strong plum colour now, from that we used earlier for the sky, and I'm painting in the shadow side of the boat. I'll use a smaller brush there for the windows, do the details for the windows in a bit. So I'm using exactly the same colour for both sides, the dark sides of the boat. And also boats have a little anti-foul paint always on the hull, and you can often see that just sticking up above the waterline. So there's a little dark bit there, and we'll put a little bit on that one. Good. And then also the stern end of this rowing boat, I'm going to do that in the same colour, but again I'm leaving that little flash look of light just across the top. So I've just reverted to my little number 2 brush, which is a little bit smaller, a little bit sharper on the tip, and I'm just going to put in the details of those windows, those facing windows, which will help them to stand out. So while they're drying, I'm going to use some burnt umber, quite strong, and I'm going to just paint in the posts and the pontoon here, and you can see the pontoon. I've just tried to leave a little flash of white on the top of it, just so it looks like the light's catching it. And then I'm going to paint in these posts here are the posts that hold the pontoon in place, so they're these big solid posts that they drive down into the sand. So the more observant amongst you may have noticed I've turned my painting sideways. This is because I'm going to paint the masts on now, and I actually find it much easier to paint these lines horizontally rather than vertically or away from myself. I find I can control the brush much better. So I just want to put a really pale narrowing line in there for the mast. Remember, all these pencil marks that you can see will be erased because we've drawn them on top of the dried watercolour paint. We can erase them, and so I just want a little mast inside this rowing boat as well. Right, now the crucial bit, the reflections. We're going to have these lovely ripply reflections in the water. This is what's going to make the whole scene look wet. What's really important about reflections is that we get them vertical. So I'm actually going to draw some guidelines on like this and hold the ruler vertically. So just to make sure that I get these lines, I'm going to need a reflection of that post, put that one in. Remember, these can all be erased afterwards. And that post there. And then we've just got to draw ourselves a little mirror image of what's happening on the underside of the boat. So I'll just draw a couple of curves in there. Little curve in there. And also I've got to consider now the reflections of this rowing boat here. So again, I need to just draw down the extremes so I know where the reflection should be going. And coming down to there, and I need an inversion here as well. So the right hand edge of this boat here is sticking up out the water, so the reflection will sort of come down like that, and then this will come down like that, and then that dark bit will reflect there like that. Now, I've studied reflections a lot, and what you will observe if you look at reflections of boats in sort of moving or rippling water is that you get quite an intensity immediately underneath, and then it gradually starts to wobble and break. And I'm going to just put that bit in quite solid there, like that. And then I'm just going to sort of zigzag the brush across. Start using the point a little bit more and gradually diminish that. And that can be quite long. It's amazing how stretched reflections can become. Right, while they're drying off, let's do a little bit of the rowing boat over here. So again, the same burnt umber colour under here, so we'll have quite a solid reflection there like that. And then that'll break, that'll sort of wobble and break and cut like this, down there like that. I'll get the reflections of the pontoon posts in. So I've got a rigger this time, and I'm just going to paint that quite solid there and start to wobble it and break it. Now these are higher than the boat, so these will come all the way to the bottom of my painting like that. And of course this pontoon might be a reflection of that visible in the water under here, which might be a little bit wobbly like that, which again I'm just using the rigger for. So I'm just putting in the shadow side, the reflections of the shadow side of the boats now, using the same plum colour, getting it solid immediately underneath and doing exactly the same as before, and pulling the brush across from side to side, gradually breaking that up and diminishing it with these lovely little flicks, horizontal brush marks. And the same with the rowing boat here. So fill in that bit quite strong and then pull the brush across from side to side, diminishing as we go down. These masts will want a little reflection as well, so to follow that line the mast might start reflecting about here and it'll wobble a bit all the way through the bottom of the painting. Same with this one, make sure I get directly below it. And there'll be a little bit of a reflection of this one here as well, probably just a little bit at the bottom of the picture there. That's it, that's completely dry now, and I've made sure that that's been dried really hard with the hairdryer, because the exciting bit now is removing the pencil. We can still see a lot of the original guidelines. So if I just use a soft eraser now and go across the whole image where I've got pencil lines, they will disappear and just leave me with the pure paint, and all the white bits that were supposed to be white, like just here on the boat, become whiter because I've removed the graphite. So I'm going to do a few final details to this. I'm going to put a couple more distant boats in here, a few more little embellishments here and there, a few more little shadows. I'm going to start with putting some lines on here. Now I'm using a Unipin pen because I just find that a little bit more reliable than the paintbrush, which then makes that look like it's a planked boat. So enjoy watching these few details while you listen to a little bit of music, and we're nearly done. So there it is. I'm going to call that a finished painting. All the techniques that you've seen in here and all the information about painting reflections in water can be found in my book, The Easy Guide to Painting Water in Watercolour. There's all sorts of other stuff in there as well, and this is available online now. So I hope you've enjoyed watching me paint that, and I look forward to seeing you on another video.